All right, hello everybody. It's Mark Zachary with I was about to say the Real Estate Pros of Houston, but that's a different podcast that I have. This is my personal podcast, and it is called A Stroke of Good Misfortunes. And if you've watched any of the podcast previously, you know I've told the story about what happened that day on September 25th of 2020, God, 21. And so it's been a little over 2 years since my stroke. But I have met some unbelievable people during my journey, and that's the reason I started this podcast, "A Stroke of Good Misfortunes." And today I've got one of my just a special girl and lady or whatever. And I'll try not to cry as I talk to her and talk about her. But she's had a tremendous impact on my life. And her
Ditto.
name is Jillian. We won't give last names, but her name is Jillian. And I know her as Jill because I lived with her. No, I didn't live with her. She worked at the place I lived for for a guy about a month, and so we got to know each other very well. And she is just a tremendous individual, and so she's a speech therapist. And so Jill, I can't thank you enough for what you did for me personally, what you did for my wife, and what you did for my family. And as we were visiting before I hit the record button, I I said, you know, I would call you a liar if you would have told me that I was going to start a podcast less than a year after I
Amazing.
met you for the first time. So you can kind of tell everybody where I came from, I guess, and but I can tell you, I was not talking very well at all, and Jill had worked with me every day. Every day she came in, except Friday. I mean Saturday and Sunday, but every day
Hmm.
it was a drill of some sort. And I can tell you,
Hmm.
her favorite drink is Topo Chico. Yeah, she loves
I
Topo
cannot
Chico.
drink that to this day without thinking about you, Mark. Every single time. Every
That's
single
funny.
time.
You know, I didn't.
Yeah.
I never had that until you, and now I've got my refrigerator full of Topo Chico.
Yeah. I have
Yeah.
a picture
So,
of you drinking it on my desk.
oh gosh, how funny. But
Yeah.
Jill, thank you so much for joining us. And
Happy to
you
be
know,
here.
we'll plan on going about 30, 40 minutes. And but like I said, it's crazy how fast that time flies when you're just visiting about what you do and why you do it and things that you love to do. So thank you again.
Yeah, of course.
So I always like to start off the podcast, whichever one we were doing, with tell me your story. Tell me about how long have you been in the Houston area? Are you from here? And we'll just start with that.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Houston. I grew up kind of in the Pearland area. And it's really interesting because with this field, I've noticed with a lot of my coworkers, typically people have gotten into this field because they had a family member or a personal experience with someone who's gone through the rehab journey.
Yeah,
But
I
mine
kind of
was
figured that. I do hear that a lot.
everyone is, my uncle, my grandpa, my brother, or something like that, which is so wonderful. I think about that all the time when I'm working with patients. Like, I hope I can be someone to inspire, getting into this field, even though they're going through such a traumatic time, maybe something like that, that's really positive can come out of that experience. But I was very unique and fortunate where I haven't had that in my family. But I went to Catholic school and we always had to volunteer and we had service hours and that kind of thing was part of our curriculum. And I love that. That was always something I looked forward to, that feeling of when you give back and that kind of warm fuzziness that you get every time you help someone.
Yeah.
Um, so when I was looking for a career, my mom was pretty instrumental. And she just handed me a book about speech pathology and was like, I think you'd be good at this. When I
Really?
was 16. Yeah. Yeah.
16.
I was 16. I was a junior in high school. And because I had kind of thought about the medical field, but I was like, I don't love blood and I don't want to be in school for my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I read about it and I was like, okay, you go to college and then you have to get your master's degree for 2 years and you get to help people communicate. Like that's the foundation of, human interaction, being able to speak to each other, being able to interact and form connections and talk to people. And I thought, what a powerful role, like what a privilege to be able to do something like that, to help people do that. And it's
Is there
very
typically an
niche.
undergraduate
Mhm.
degree that someone gets before they go into this?
Yeah. So there's kind of two. The one I got, it's called Communication Sciences and Disorders. And then another one is just speech language pathology. It's kind of worded two different ways.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I shadowed a few speech therapists in Houston and I was like, all right, sign me up. I'll do it.
Yeah. One thing
Yeah.
I didn't realize about speech therapy is you do more than just help people learn how to talk again. I mean, you
Mhm.
spent hours and hours with me on learning how to swallow,
Mhm.
and it was the day before I was discharged
Mhm.
that we finally passed that swallow test. So there's so many
Mhm.
things that you guys do that I didn't even know.
Yeah, and that's something as a field we say our title is so misleading because I have so many patients. I walk into their room and say, "Hi, I'm Jill from speech," and they're like, "Oh, I talk just fine." I'm
Yeah,
like, "Well, I'm
yeah.
also here because you have a feeding tube in your stomach and we've got to teach you how to swallow, like you said, or patients who have some of that kind of cognitive confusion or memory loss. We also work with people a lot on regaining their ability to remember things and pay attention to detail and some of those kind of like higher level skills as well.
So walk us through what you're doing in that area
Hmm.
about the cognitive being able to remember things. You had me read stuff all the
Hmm.
time back to you
Hmm.
and over and over. So kind of walk me through that
Yeah.
side of the therapy that you're going through.
Yeah, so it depends a lot too, kind of traumatic brain injury, so kind of like an insult to the brain versus a stroke or a bleed, which is what you had. And we kind of categorize like mild, moderate, or severe. And I would say your cognitive impairments were more mild. You knew where you were. So there's times where, I ask a patient, can you tell me what year it is? And they may say something very off. Orientation is kind of what we call that. We want to make sure people know where they are, when they are. And a lot of that is just daily drilling. I tell my patients, look, I'm going to drive you crazy, but every single day I'm going to ask you, tell me what year it is. Tell me your
Yeah.
name. Tell me where you are, and sometimes we'll hang up signs in the room so that can kind of serve as like a visual reminder for people. Um, we work a lot with memory, so trying to train people on strategies to help them remember, do you need to write it down? Do you need to think of some kind of silly thing? Like I tell all my patients, think of Jack and Jill going up the hill when you hear my name, like Jill, and then they'll kind of make that association. Um, so it's kind of a mix of what we call teaching people compensatory strategies, so a way to compensate,
Hmm.
and also we try to restore the memory or the attention or whatever. And doing those drills, having people read a story and then read it back to me, or read a story and then I ask you questions. It's kind of drilling your brain to use those muscles again to help you remember, to learn how to remember things.
Yeah, I remember listening to the stories that you read,
Hmm.
and then I would have to repeat, like, where this guy went fishing, what kind of fish he caught, how many he
Yeah.
caught. It's like, dear Lord, Jill, you're driving me crazy. I get it,
Exactly.
but I
Exactly.
mean, all of that contributed to helping me. Obviously, where it was frustrating to me at the beginning I
Mhm.
really see what it was for and why we did. I mean,
Mhm.
when I was in intensive care, I was in IC for uh, I guess right at a week, and then they
Mhm.
took me to critical care, and because I wasn't doing hardly any talking in ICU, I
Mm.
just if I tried, you probably couldn't understand me anyway. But
Yeah.
then we went into critical care, and they were having me sing this. The first speech pathologist was having me sing the happy
Was that
birthday.
happy birthday? That's
Yes,
usually our
happy
go-to.
birthday, and different things that we
Count
should
from 1
we
to 10.
yeah, and it was like I don't want to sing happy birthday. I'm not real happy right now, and but it all helped, and so I was only in critical care I think about 5 days, and then I went straight to you. So there
Mhm.
wasn't much stuff other than doing a couple of things, happy birthday, and I forgot maybe the a national anthem or something.
Yeah, or like ABCs, some of those
Yeah,
we call
yep,
those like automatic speech tasks. So it's like those things that are really preserved in your brain that frontwards, backwards, left and right. Like you can just say that no matter what.
yeah. But
Mhm.
when I look at how far I've come, my daughter, while I was in critical care, um, I called my daughter and I could not remember my wife's phone number. And
Mm.
but I could remember Katie's. And so I called
Mm.
her and left her a message, and she saved that message. And man, where I thought I was being pretty clear on my instructions,
Mhm.
it was just a bunch of fumbled words that
Really?
made very little sense. And
Yeah.
somehow, out of that jumbleness, she found out what I was trying to say,
Mhm.
and got what I was trying to say done. I was
Mhm.
letting her know that our dog had a vet appointment on Thursday, and she needed to make sure
Mm.
that she took Scout. And
Mhm.
so I thought I was really communicating well. And but she'll play that recording from time to time for me and
Yeah.
say, "Dad, look
Look
at
how
where you
far you've
came from."
come.
And I
Yeah.
remember Dr. Falco would come in, and after we had a few episodes or sessions, I guess, and
Mhm.
man, he was pretty impressed with what you were doing and how I was progressing. But it was
Mhm.
so frustrating to do the same thing over and over
Over and
and over.
over and over.
But thank you for making me do it over and over
Yeah.
and over again.
That's one thing I try to be really transparent with patients about, like, "Look, I know I'm driving you crazy. I know this is so redundant, but I promise you it will pay off," And that's why I try to find things that at least interest you. I remember at the time, I don't know if that was the year. No, we didn't win the World Series, but I think the Astros were in the World Series.
Yes.
And because I remember I was like, okay, I have to leave the TV on whatever channel it was for you whenever I left. And I would always ask you about the games and stuff. So I would try to find stories about the Astros or make you read articles about the Astros. So I was like, at least I'm annoying him, but it's something he cares about. you
See,
know?
now I thought you were just annoying me, but you were actually giving me some practice to use my brain to
Exactly.
recall stuff.
I was like, you know more about baseball than me, so you can teach me something. You just got to read this out loud.
Well, you know what? Let's go over to a little bit about the taste, not the taste, but the swallow test, and what you do in regards to getting people to swallow. And you're
hmm
welcome, like I said before we started, you're welcome to share anything you want about my situation. I know y'all have that, the
HIPAA.
medical uh, situation where you not supposed to, but unless you have some sort of authority to do so, well, you have full authority to share whatever you want with me and with this podcast. Because obviously, when I first got there, I had a feeding tube because I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't swallow without actually choking to death or basically drowning myself
Mm-hmm.
when I would have something to drink. So they actually gave me that feeding tube
Mm-hmm.
back in ICU. So kind of walk everybody through what you're doing when people are learning how to swallow and what has happened to their throat to allow them to not be able to swallow.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I remember actually, you started out with what we call an NG tube or nasogastric tube. So you had the tube in your nose at first, which is usually what we put when we think, okay, maybe there is a chance that this person could eat or drink safely soon.
And those are
Um,
very comfortable, by the way.
they're terrible. They're so uncomfortable. And then, kind of unfortunately for you at the time, basically it's kind of like if you can get that out with an ICU, you're great. But if they think, you know what, you may have kind of a longer recovery with your swallowing, then we're going to put in what's called the PEG tube, which is like
Hmm.
the feeding tube in the stomach, because they know how uncomfortable that NG tube is and they don't want you to have that. So the PEG tube is just a little bit safer and more comfortable.
Yeah. I couldn't I
But
couldn't be transferred to you guys until that peg tube was put in.
oh,
And so when
really?
I got there, that was already
Hmm.
in.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. So basically, what happens whenever we have a brain injury or a brain bleed, stroke, whatever you want to call it, our depending on where it is in the brain, it can affect our swallowing. So sometimes you'll hear people say, like, I had a right-sided stroke, or I had a left-sided stroke, or I had a brainstem stroke. So typically with our brain, we have different centers where certain things are stored, So like on the left side is your language. The right side is more of your kind of filter and those sorts of things. But you can have swallowing issues, all over. So with that, your brain is in control of your swallowing. So we don't really think about it because it's such an automatic process. You
Yeah.
take a bite, you start chewing, you're not telling your muscles, hey, it's time to swallow. You just do it.
Right.
So when you have a bleed, it kind of interrupts that pathway with the brain and the muscles of how they work, and it's nothing you're doing wrong. It's just quite physically, just how if you want to lift your arm, you can't always do it just because those muscles have been kind of damaged with that pathway. So when you came to me, I believe, I can't remember, I was trying to think about this, if you were not able to eat anything or if you were on the thickened liquids.
Um, I don't remember if I couldn't eat any.
Yeah,
I thought I was able to eat.
I
Uh,
think you were doing the thickened liquids because I remember you hated them.
yeah, yeah, and they got thinner and thinner as we went on. Yeah,
Yes.
it was pretty thick for quite some
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. So what was happening, Mark, when you swallowed, I think solids weren't too bad, but when you were trying to drink water, instead of the water going down your esophagus into your stomach, which is what we want, it was going down your trachea into your lungs. So that sensation when you start choking, you say, oh, I think something went down the wrong pipe. Yours was going down the wrong pipe and you had no control over it. It was nothing you were doing. And so that's super common when people have strokes, and we call that dysphagia or swallowing difficulties. And what they noticed with you at the hospital before was that whenever they give you liquid that's a little bit thicker, it was actually safer. So sometimes, if you think about it, if you just pour out a glass of water, that water comes rushing down. That's
Yeah.
what we call like thin liquid. But if you pour out a smoothie, it goes a little bit slower. And so since, in that recovery time, you needed that slowness, you needed extra time to be able to swallow safely. Um, and so one of the ways that we like to look at that is through different things called swallow studies or swallow tests. And the one that we did for you was not super comfortable.
And it was
um,
so repetitive.
we did it probably like, I think 3 or 4 times. We did it a lot.
Yeah.
Um, And that one, it's called a fees. And what we do is we take a camera, it's on this long scope, and we stick it up your nose. And what do you think? I describe it as a COVID test, kind of, but do you think it's worse?
Uh, yes, I do think it's worse because COVID didn't actually go down my throat and all that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah. We got a funny story about that here in a few minutes. I'm sure you remember it. I hope you do. If you
Oh my
don't, you're
gosh.
gonna remember when we're done.
I think about it all the time. But yeah, so we did that. We did that test a few times, and each time you got better and better. And one of the things, the reason why we laugh about Topo Chico so much, so one of the exams we saw that when we gave you Topo Chico or like a carbonated liquid, you actually did pretty well with that in small amounts.
Yeah,
And
I'm
so,
sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
you guys had said things
Mhm.
that are carbonated actually your throat reacts differently for some reason. But is that not the
Yeah.
case for everybody?
No, no, it's not the case for everybody because I have had patients where we try the carbonated as well, and it still goes to the lungs.
Really?
Yeah, so everybody's different, but I would say 50% and greater have that same reaction you do, where that extra like carbonation sensation kind of fires your muscles to act sooner and act stronger.
Okay. And just so
Mhm,
everybody knows, when she says we were doing this Topo Chico, she'd bring in a full bottle and
mhm.
she'd pour it into a cup, and I would literally have to take it a spoonful at a time. And I think when we first started, I make you get, I don't know, less than 10 spoonfuls, and they weren't
Mhm.
full
It was like a half
spoonfuls.
teaspoon.
Yes. And so you would drink the liquid that was on the spoon
Mhm.
and hope that you didn't choke on just that little bit of liquid. And man, I remember so many times that I would just feel like I was coughing up my lungs
Yeah,
with just a little bit of
yeah.
liquid. And but the good thing is, we started out doing 5 and then 10, and then Jill would always say, okay, well, let's try to get to 20 and to
Mhm,
25. And I
mhm.
can't even remember what was the last number that we tried
I
to get to
know.
before we went to pass the
Yeah.
well,
Had to be in the
swallow
high
test.
20s because I remember, like, talking about it, people were like, "Man, like, give that guy a break," and I was like, "No, we're so close, like, I know he can do it, we have to keep pushing." I would tell you, it's like push-ups for your throat, you just gotta, like, just keep going.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So, because it's just reworking the muscles. You described it so well that when it's not that your muscles aren't working, just
Mhm.
the brain is no longer communicating with those muscles to do what they need to do.
Exactly.
And so that's part of my rehab right now is
Mhm,
retraining my muscles to walk the way they used to walk. And
mhm.
I just had my first grandson back in May. So he's six
Yes!
months old today, and
Oh my
so I
gosh.
get to watch some of the same things that he's struggling with.
Mhm.
I'm struggling with at 56. So like, okay, me and him just gonna have to learn how to walk together. And
Yeah.
but everything's is a long road. But
Mhm,
yeah, the little spoonfuls at a time was
mhm.
like, man, we'd get close to our goal, and then I'd go to choking it, and so God,
I
we'd have to
know,
start
and you would
over the
always be
next
like,
day.
"No, I'm sorry," and I'm like, "Mark, we have to stop right there."
I
Yeah,
know it, and
you
she
just wanted
never.
to take the cup and chug it.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was about to say. She's a very mean person when it comes to her role because she never would leave that bottle
Mm-mm,
of Topo
mm-mm.
Chico, and she wouldn't even leave the cup that she poured in there. So she always made me start over the next day, but we got
Yeah,
a lot of good practice.
I had to make sure I clean everything because you wouldn't say anything if I left the room.
A funny story. When I was at ICU, no, in critical care, I
Mhm,
was so thirsty. My tongue was just so dry, and because
mhm,
they had stopped all liquid,
mhm.
and so I hadn't had anything to drink for almost probably 10 days. And so
Wow.
it was kind of hot in there, and they'd come and they'd give me a rag, and so I put
Mhm.
the rag on my head and to stay cool. Well, I started thinking, if I get them to refill this rag, I'm just going to suck the water out of there. And so I got caught
That's
trying to
smart.
suck the water out of that wash rag that was supposed to be on my head.
You
Yeah,
gotta
so
get
I got in
creative
trouble a
sometimes.
few times. All right, so do you want to tell the funny story, or do you
I
want
think
me
you
to?
should tell it. I can
Okay,
I can add any details if I remember, but I love to hear you tell the story.
okay. So she was talking about how they had put a camera down my throat or down my
Mhm.
nose, and it went down my throat, and it could see, um, what was going on down there. Well, during all that time, still had the peg tube, and it was still in my stomach, and that's how they gave me medicines and most of my liquid because they didn't want me to get dehydrated. So it needed to get in there somehow. So they'd shoot it through that tube. Well, that tube had a little clamp on it at the very end, and when it was time to put stuff in there, they'd undo it, stuff all that liquid through that tube, and then they'd shut it off. Well, when we went to do this um, swallow test to see how I was doing, I think this was this. I don't know. Well, it wasn't the last one. I know that it was I think the second
Fun.
one,
Mhm.
and so the stuff you guys give me, you put some coloring into the liquid, right? And so the
Food
color,
dye.
yes, a dye. Okay, so I'm starting to they start giving me the liquid, and I'm sitting in my wheelchair, and all of a sudden I'm leaking, and I'm looking down at the floor like, oh my gosh, something. And Jill is like, oh Mark, don't worry about it. It happens all the time. And I'm thinking that I'm peeing on myself and I don't realize it. And so Julie is like, she was with me during this test. And so I look down and it's like a greenish color, and I'm thinking, oh my God, there's major
Was
issues.
turning on. It was just water running.
Yeah, just falling out. And it's like, oh my gosh. And poor Jill, she was like, don't worry about it, Mark. It happens all the time. We'll get it cleaned up. And she's running off to get towels and this. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm not even feeling anything. And come to find out that she was giving me that liquid, that dye and all that stuff down my mouth. It was going down my mouth, down my throat, and straight at that tube. The tube had became it had opened up somehow, and that water was just going straight through me and out that tube. We had the biggest laugh ever, and but here I am thinking, I'm sorry, I'm peeing all myself and I don't even know it. And poor Jill's like, oh God, what? No, no, really, it's fine, Mark. It happens all the time. And so she was probably lying to me just to make me feel better.
Happen a lot. It does happen a lot.
Does it? The
No,
tube
it
comes
does.
out or
We
people pee on themselves?
accidents in there. Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
that'll happen more.
well, I was
I
glad
don't think I've had the tube thing since you. That hasn't happened since you were in there.
well, I probably made it to where you check those tubes before you put anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. I
That's a
had a lot of
checklist before we
embarrassing
start.
moments during my stay in the hospital, and that was one of them. But it turned out to be pretty funny. So, well, I had a year a year after the stroke party that I invited Jill to, and all the other therapists, and you'll get to meet them or watch, look back and watch some of the previous ones. But the ones that worked with me the most are coming up, and Jill was the first one that worked with me the most. And so we had a 1 year anniversary party, and Jill came to my house along with some other therapists. And Jill, do you remember what you gave me for my 1 year anniversary?
Chico.
Complete a big bottle of Topo Chico, and I enjoyed that like you wouldn't believe.
Got the bottle.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was such a
I have on my
special.
desk.
You what?
That's the picture I have on my desk.
Yeah, is that? Yeah, I'm just chugging. I'm pretending like I'm chugging it, right? Yeah, she never would let me do that. So
Able to do it.
yeah. All right. So we're at 31 minutes right now. But are there any other like things that you do that will help people learn how to swallow, and different things that they can do to continue to get stronger and stronger? I feel like I was really strong in swallowing by the time I left, but they really wanted me to pass the swallow test before I ever left there. And I don't even know if you know, but I was leaving on a Wednesday, and I passed the swallow test on Tuesday. It was the day before I left.
Stressed out because you were like, I am not going home on those thickened liquids. And I was like, please, God, let this man pass. Because I knew that was just so important to you. Because sorry, my dog's here. The swallowing was the primary thing for you. I remember, Mark, seriously, I was doing research. I pulled out my textbook. I was like, I have to go get this man to go home, because I was still kind of new. That was my first year at the hospital. So,
oh, really?
You were one of my first cases where we went
Oh
from
my gosh.
nothing. I didn't want to tell you that when I was working with you.
I would assume you'd been doing this for years.
Into the field at that point. And
you broke up just a little bit there. What were you saying?
2 years into my career at that point.
Wow.
But you were one of my first patients where it was like feeding tube and all of that. Gosh, but you had such a wonderful recovery. Like, your recovery journey, I know it's, it seems slow, highs and lows, but to be able to leave talking, having some leg mobility and eating.
Jill, you're cutting out just a little bit in your audio. Oh. Can you hear me okay?
Hang on.
Well, there, now I can hear you. Now you're off again. And I can edit out any of this. So
sorry, can you hear me now?
Now I can. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't remember what I was saying. Oh, just saying, yeah, that just like relatively speaking, your recovery timeline, just in terms of being in the inpatient time, was really, really good. Because I think about you when I tell patients to relax and not worry about work, because I would walk in and you would have your laptop and say, hang on, let me finish working and we can get started with our session.
Yeah, I don't think Dr. Falco was real happy about me having the computer up, but yeah, it's amazing what kind of work you can do with one finger and
You
one
made
hand. So yeah, I don't think anybody liked that a whole lot.
it.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
but I think with the whole swallowing thing and in general, as you know, patience is the biggest thing. It's easier said than done, but I think also being an advocate for yourself is really important. You know, you don't know what you don't know, and until you have to go through something like this, it's
yeah,
really hard to understand this whole world. And so I think what you're doing is amazing and trying to educate people on this and make this more common knowledge. So God forbid if something happens to, you know, a listener or someone they know, they can be like, okay, let me advocate for speech therapy, or let me, you know, try to work on this a little bit more, because sometimes those options aren't always laid out to people, you know?
yeah. So do you work with, obviously, I was a stroke victim.
Hmm.
Do you work with other brain injuries as well?
Yeah, so a lot of my patients are traumatic brain injuries. So I've gotten more into this population called disorders of consciousness.
Yeah.
This is a big one where I work, where also a lot of people are not aware. So these are your patients who are minimally conscious and who people kind of deem like vegetative. And they'll come to us and maybe they can wiggle a finger or blink. And we try to kind of bring them out of that minimally conscious state and find a way for them to communicate and work on swallowing and be able to have some kind of mobility. So a lot of those patients are like severe car accidents, those kinds of things from brain injury.
Wow. So when somebody has trouble talking
Mhm.
again after whatever the accident,
Mhm.
stroke, car wreck, whatever, does that normally mean that they're going to have trouble swallowing as well?
That's a good question. They're not necessarily directly correlated, but a lot of the times we do see both, especially, and it's tough because sometimes one kind of is faster recovering than the other.
Yeah.
Um, but we do have a saying that if you can get someone eating, that'll get them talking, because you're using a lot of the same muscles, and
Yeah.
person starts chewing, then they kind of remember, like, oh yeah, if I move my tongue like this, maybe I can say the L sound, or maybe I can say my name. So it's not one and the same, but they can be related. Yeah.
Do you see, because my situation was when I did start eating again, and but I would always bite my lip.
Hmm.
Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, yeah. Because
Yeah.
did you bite it probably on the weaker side?
Yes, sure
Yeah,
did.
yeah. So you had some of that, like, probably kind of like facial, like numbing or weakness. So yeah, it kind of
Yeah.
gets.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I still have a little bit of weakness and numbness right in the corner of my mouth,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the weak side, obviously the right side. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, man, when I was getting home and I had to go to the doctor and get this, I had bitten it down so many times
Mm-hmm.
that it had kind of make it a ball over here, so it made it
Oh
worse.
gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't know if that was
It's normal.
kind of normal. Also, you know, is it normal for people to lose their uh, taste in regards to a brain injury? Do you
Yeah, a
see
lot
that a
of
lot?
I have patients whose taste buds change. I have a patient right now, we can't get him to eat anything. He's on a regular diet and they think it's swallowing, and we did all of our tests and he's fine, but he's just like nothing tastes good. Like everything just tastes different for him. So yeah, that can happen too.
Well, I guess that's a good uh, reason to eat healthy since it all
Yeah,
tastes bad anyway. You might,
exactly. We were
you
like, well,
know,
your vegetables.
yeah, I know. Come on, get the broccoli and cauliflower out, right? You know, I don't eat ice cream anymore because it just doesn't taste good to me, and a lot of sweets don't taste good to me. So, you
Wow.
know, I've lost quite a bit of weight because I'm just not eating the same junk that I had,
Yeah.
and I'm eating better, but I'm not eating near as much because it, you know, I think for a while you just, well, most people eat because they enjoy something,
Right.
well, if I'm not enjoying it, then what's the reason to eat it? So,
Yeah.
but anyway, I didn't know if that was kind of normal for
Hmm.
brain injuries.
Yeah.
So you've obviously had some pretty highs and lows in your career. You know, I'm sure people have come in there and they need help with this or that, and it just never takes. You know, what's the most challenging thing that you've kind of come across in your short career?
Yeah, I definitely think those times where you can't fix somebody, because I see every patient as a challenge in a way of like, okay, how can I have make this person better than when they first got here? And sometimes no matter what you do, that person is just not having that type of neuro recovery that you want. And I think it's really I love working with younger patients. My favorite age is like the early 20s,
Mm,
and I love those patients, but then also it can be very hard because they had their whole life ahead of them, and having to
yeah,
work with families and having to have the conversation of, will my loved one ever talk again or eat again? Like, those are probably some of the hardest days, where if you don't see that, it 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 makes it hard on you to want to keep going, and especially for the families too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, I can imagine. I would go to therapy in at your location, and even after I left there,
Hmm.
you know, and you see these kids that I saw one kid that had both of his legs amputated at the hip level,
Yeah.
and you know, here I am complaining that I have to carry a cane everywhere,
Yeah.
and this kid's 5 years old. He's got a lifetime of dealing with this, and I have whatever I have. I'm 50. I was 54 when this happened, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to be around another 54 years. But this kid may be around 54 more years,
Yeah.
and so it really kind of jogs you into reality that you know you're what happened to me is awful. I hope it never happens to anybody that I know.
Hmm.
But I'm trying to focus on what's good about it, and that's the reason for the podcast. But it's got to be very disheartening because I'm sure that happens more than you want to admit,
Yeah.
because there's some wicked car wrecks and gunshots and strokes and different things. Last year, you invited me down to visit with a guy that was having a difficulty just coping with his stroke,
Hmm.
and I don't know what happened to him. That's well, it's important, but I know we're not going to talk about it today. But I don't know what happened to him. But he was about to get out, and he wasn't near as far along as I was when I got out,
Hmm.
and so bless your heart for doing what you do, and I appreciate you inviting me down there to meet with this guy and visit with him and his wife. And if you and I'll tell you right now, if you ever need that again, you're welcome to
For sure.
pick up the phone and call me. So, all right. So we touched on some difficult times. What's the most rewarding things that you can talk about just real quickly?
Well, I will say one of the best things with you was having you drink your first sip of water, and when you could actually, drink it safely. But I would say probably the first sip and the first words I hear are my golden thing. And I usually try to find out what the patient's favorite drink is so we can have like a victory drink together. Um,
Yeah.
usually try to bring that up, and so, pending it's not beer or wine, I try to bring it up to them. But those first moments are always the thing that keep me going for
Well,
sure.
I don't even know why you didn't give me beer because it's carbonated. That's just as good as it's actually better than Topo.
Trust
So we
me, I was tempted to bring it to your party, but I was like, I don't think this is very appropriate.
that would have been so funny. Well, I know there's plenty of rewarding times that you I mean, why else would you do this? It's because there's
Absolutely.
a challenge, and you know that a certain percentage of them are going to turn out to where you're helping somebody be better. They may not ever get back to what they were, but when they came to you, they're better when they left you.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you have any long-term plans with this role? Do you want to go into, I know you have to have a master's. Is there a
Mhm.
doctorate in this?
There is. You can get your PhD, and typically those people want to go into research or work like in academia. I do like the kind of educational role. I don't know if I'd want to get my PhD, but I've been mentoring a lot of our new hires, and I've really found joy in that. It's showed me like, oh, I kind of do know what I'm talking about. So it's kind of
Yeah.
fun when you have to tell someone else how to do their job. You're like, okay,
Well,
um,
they couldn't have chosen anybody better than
thank
you
you.
to train them.
So I really enjoy that. And then I've kind of been starting to read about the, technology in speech. And there's this really big push for accessibility and things like, for example, a lot of our patients, everybody uses Siri or Alexa, but patients with dysarthria or like slurred speech, they can't use that. So I'm reading about how speech pathologists are trying to infiltrate Google and all these things, and trying to make the world a little bit more inclusive. So maybe dabbling into that, later on after I get more experience in the clinical world. I think it's a really cool movement happening.
Well, you guys, exposed me to something I didn't even know was out there. But you made sure that when I left, I had a little card that I
Yeah.
carried with me when I drive wherever I go,
Oh,
in
yeah.
case I get pulled over. And why don't you explain what that card was?
Yeah, I forgot I gave it to you. Yeah, so this card, I don't know if we just called it like an aphasia card or
Yep,
something.
yep,
It looks like a driver's license, almost like the shape and the size, so it can fit in your wallet. And it's for people who have aphasia or communication disorders, and it explains what that is. And I think it says, what the best way to communicate with you is, and has an emergency contact. So
yeah,
sometimes people who have the aphasia or a communication disorder, they sound drunk, for lack of a better term.
yeah,
They sound,
yeah,
they're under the influence of something. And so this card can prove to law enforcement or anyone, in case you get pulled over, like, hey, I'm okay, but this is just how I communicate right now.
yeah. Never would have even thought about that. And you talk about technology. That's not technology, but being there
Hmm.
exposed me to so much stuff that I didn't even know about. And technology is one of them, but little things like that,
Yeah.
just I mean, it's something I would never have thought of.
Right.
But I mean, I started out with. I would have been a very drunk person if you'd have talked to me the first time that I walked in there, because I'm sure it sounded like I was pretty drunk. But it was aphasia, so I got to blame it on aphasia.
And
And
a
so
lot of it,
now,
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say a lot of these things come from patients. So if you ever have those experiences where you're like, I wish something like this existed, run with it, because it came from a patient who got pulled over, who got, like, I don't know if they got pulled,
Right.
but it came from that experience. And a speech therapist created this, and it's like a national thing we use. So those are, really important to turn that bad experience into something useful for someone else.
Yeah. It was crazy. Just
Hmm.
crazy stuff. Well, how would somebody go? And I'm going to let you go. I'm at 48 minutes, and I told you it would
You're
go
right. It does go
super
by
fast,
fast.
very fast. So, how would somebody get started in this field? Where is a good uh, school or college? Or what would their first step be in getting into or looking into being a speech pathologist?
I would say the biggest thing is shadowing. One thing about our field that is incredible is there's so many different places you can work.
So the biggest thing is kind of kids versus adults.
Mhm.
And so I actually shadowed a lot of clinics where there were children. But once I
Mhm.
got into school, I realized this neuro brain injury population is what I love. But I would say try to find, a speech pathologist in a school or at a private practice or even at a hospital. We have people come shadow all the time just so you can see what a day in the life looks like to spark your interest and see, okay, is this something I could do?
Yeah.
And then from there, you could research, what colleges have the degree, what that could look like in your timeline of where you'd want to get your master's degree. A lot of the times people work for a little bit and then get their master's, so you don't have to go straight through. But I think
Mhm.
shadowing is the best thing because it's a field that's kind of hard to explain. And then once you see it in action, you can kind of be like, oh, yay, I love this, or maybe it's not for me.
Man, I can't imagine being a speech pathologist for kids because they're having enough trouble, learning to speak in the first place. So I don't know. That seems like it'd be very, very difficult. My sister-in-law, I mean, not my sister-in-law, my niece through a marriage is a speech pathologist through for infants and kids. And I'm like, gosh, how do you do this? I couldn't do it.
I
I
know.
don't have that kind of patience.
One of my best friends works in the schools in Boston, and we joke we have the same degree, but there's no way we could do each other's jobs.
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't know what you do. He works with teenagers with autism, so it's
really.
very specific. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And I'm like, I teach
Um,
people how to swallow, and he's like, I don't know what you do.
Bless your heart.
Yeah,
Bless your heart. And thank you so much for working with me just day in and day out for, I
absolutely.
think it's at least 4 weeks. It may have been five. I've got to count them up on the number of weeks that I was
Yeah,
actually there.
yeah.
But it was a long haul, and I'm still working on a lot of things. I notice, and maybe you can give me some tips, but I notice when I get cold, I don't speak as well, or if I get really tired,
Mhm.
then I might as well just stop talking because I start having to get my card out right there, just talking to Julie, saying, no, I haven't had too much to drink, but Jill gave me this card, so back off.
I love it. You
Yeah,
know,
so
I don't know about temperature. I know fatigue definitely contributes to that because your brain is just fried. Like you have that cognitive fatigue, and then physically your muscles are maybe just
yeah,
not, working as sharply as they could.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because Dr. Falco, he would say, "Well, how much are you planning on working today?" And I'm done till I think you always came in at 1
Hmm.
and had lunch and all that from like 11 to 1, or had a
Hmm.
break and then lunch. And so I'd work during the lunch and then after you, and he would just like, no, you don't need to do more than a couple hours a day because you got to let your brain heal and rest. And
Exactly.
so yeah, I can tell when I'm tired. I can tell when I'm cold.
Hmm.
And so I guess that will improve with time, or it won't. And I'll just
Yeah,
uh, keep practicing as long as I can.
definitely.
Well,
Definitely.
Jill, anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was so much fun.
You bet. I
Yeah.
wouldn't even have this thing without asking you to be on. And I appreciate you
Yeah.
taking an hour of your time
Of
and spending
course.
it with me. And we're going to have another reunion or celebration, maybe at the 5 year, but 3 years is going to be in September. We may do it for September.
Wow.
And so I just know that we love you. And Julie said to tell you hi.
Yeah.
And I think she said she texted you.
Yeah.
And
I think she did. I was just looking at that. I didn't recognize.
yeah, but she said to
Yeah.
tell you hello and that she
Yeah.
loves you. And we both love you. My girls love you because you helped put me back together.
No, y'all are always with me. When I have a bad day, I look at that picture of you drinking the topo and I'm like, I got to keep on doing it for Mark.
Well, I appreciate that, and I get to take a lot of good pictures with my new grandson, and
Yes.
so I wouldn't even be, getting to do what I do with my grandson if it weren't for the people at the place that you work, and we won't have to disclose what that is, but you guys are special. You're just a different breed of people that just give, and you probably don't get a whole lot of recognition, for what you do. But I just want you to know that we really appreciate everything you did for us, and me especially.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right. Well, I'll let you go for now, guys. If there's ever any questions you have in regards to strokes and things that you're going through, or you just want to have a talk about what you're going through or a family member is going through, reach out. That's what this podcast is for. I want it to be educational, and I want it to be maybe encouraging. But when I walked in that day, or I didn't walk in, I came in on a stretcher, and was in serious doubt that I would even survive. I was not walking, I was not talking, and now I'm doing both, and it all is a testament to people like Jill and Shay and Chelsea, and just I can't even start naming everybody, because it's just a different breed of people, and this world would be a much better place if we had more people like Jill. So Jill, thank you again for being a guest.
Thank you so much. Anytime.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Right.